My name's Trevor, I'm 27, and until recently, I thought I had a decently functional family. Not perfect, no one's is, but the kind you roll your eyes at during reunions, not the kind that makes you question your entire sense of belonging. I'm the middle child of three. My older sister Rachel, 31, has always been the loud one, the center of attention at every party, every holiday, every dinner. And my younger brother Liam, 24, is the golden retriever type, goofy, lovable, never really involved in drama. Me? I've always been quieter, more reserved, a little more private, I guess. I was the one who read books in corners while everyone else played charades. The one who helped clean up after dinners without being asked. The one who never quite felt heard. I didn't mind it, not at first. I liked my space, my journals, my quiet little routines. I kept to myself, and for a long time, that seemed like enough. Growing up, Rachel had this habit of teasing me, not in the playful sibling way, but the cutting kind, the kind that makes people laugh and then go, "Oh, come on, lighten up," when it clearly stings. She'd point out how I talked to myself while doing homework, mock the way I'd rehearse conversations in the mirror before a date. Once, she printed out a poem I wrote in high school, something cringy but heartfelt, and taped it to the fridge just to see how red my face would get when our cousins came over. My parents never stepped in. "She's just joking," Mom would say with a shrug, like I was the problem for being sensitive. And maybe I was. Maybe I still am. But I kept my boundaries tight. I learned to lock my door, to write in my journal at night when no one was around, to keep the parts of myself I cared about tucked away in metaphorical boxes, where no one could reach in and twist them into a punchline. Writing's always been my outlet, a way to unload the static in my head, the insecurities I didn't feel comfortable saying out loud. And yeah, I wrote about everything, my awkward crushes, the self-doubt, the things I wish I'd said during arguments but didn't. I even wrote letters to future versions of myself, trying to remind myself to keep going, that I was enough, even when it didn't feel like it, especially then. So when I came home for Christmas this past year, I brought my journal with me, not for attention or drama, but because I'd gotten in the habit of writing before bed. It helped with the anxiety that always flared up during family events. My childhood room was still mostly intact. Rachel had moved out years ago and Liam was staying in the guest room, so I figured it'd be fine. I tucked the journal in the back of a drawer before we headed downstairs for dinner. We'd made it through the awkward small talk, the passive-aggressive jabs about why I was still single, and even Dad's yearly tradition of listing every reason the turkey was overcooked. It was actually going okay. For once, I thought maybe the holidays wouldn't feel like emotional landmines. Then, just as dessert hit the table, my mom's famous peppermint bark, which I normally loved, Rachel cleared her throat. I noticed the smirk on her face first, then the worn, black notebook in her hands. My notebook. My stomach dropped like a stone, but for a split second, I told myself she wouldn't. That even Rachel wouldn't go that far. She did. "I found something very entertaining in Trevor's room," she said, holding it up like a trophy. "Apparently our little introvert has been keeping secrets." Everyone laughed. I didn't. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. I was frozen in place, trying to process how she'd found it, how she'd thought this was okay, how no one had stopped her yet. Then she flipped it open and started reading, word for word, out loud, in her loud, theatrical voice, like she was doing a dramatic monologue on stage. "December 2nd, she began, already snickering. "Saw Hannah at the bookstore again. I think she smiled at me. Probably nothing, but it made my day. I wish I had the courage to ask her out, but I don't even know if she remembers my name. I feel like such an idiot." There was laughter, not just from Rachel, from Liam, too, though his was more nervous, from Uncle Mark, from even my dad, who chuckled and shook his head like I was 12 again. My mom swatted at Rachel half-heartedly, muttering, "That's enough," but she was smiling. No one stopped her. She kept going, reading entries about how I felt like I was always the background character in my own life, about how I was struggling at work, doubting if I was good enough, about the time I cried in my car after a job interview that went nowhere. She read a letter I wrote to myself after a panic attack, the one where I promised to keep trying, even when it felt hopeless. I don't even remember getting up. I just remember the heat in my face, the sound of my pulse in my ears, and the crushing, overwhelming sense of humiliation. I walked over, grabbed the journal from her hands, her nail polish still chipped from the stupid Christmas nail art she'd posted on Instagram, and walked straight out the door without saying a word. They didn't follow. They didn't even call until 2 days later. Rachel left a voicemail that said, "Come on, it was just a joke." My mom texted a half-hearted apology and said Rachel didn't mean anything by it. Liam sent me a meme about being too soft. I didn't reply. I couldn't. That was 3 months ago. I haven't seen them since. Haven't responded to calls, texts, or the birthday card that arrived late with a "hope you're not still mad" smiley face scribbled inside. According to Liam, who still messages me from time to time, they're all confused about why I've been so distant. They think I'm being dramatic, that I can't take a joke, that I should just get over it already. But something broke that night, and they don't even see it. They think it was about a crush confession or a few embarrassing words. But it wasn't. It was about trust, about dignity, about the fact that I've spent my whole life trying to keep the most fragile parts of myself safe. And in one night, the people who were supposed to protect me turned those parts into party entertainment. And now, months later, I've stopped asking myself if I was overreacting. I've started asking something else. What do you do when the people who claim to love you can't be trusted with even the smallest pieces of who you are? Because if they don't understand that, then maybe they never really saw me at all. And maybe it's time they do. I didn't block them right away. I wish I had. But for some reason, I kept the lines open. Maybe part of me hoped one of them would really get it. That someone, anyone, would call and say something like, "Trevor, I'm sorry. That was cruel. You didn't deserve that." But those words never came. Instead, the messages came in waves. Rachel was the first. "It's not like I read everything, geez. I thought it was funny. You're so sensitive." Then Liam, who tried to be the peacemaker. "Come on, man." She crossed a line, but she didn't mean harm. "Just come by next weekend. We miss you." Even Mom chimed in with, "You know how your sister is." She was just trying to get a laugh. Don't let this ruin the family. But it had ruined something. Not in an explosive way, but in a quiet, irreversible shift I felt every time I glanced at my phone and saw their names pop up. There was a hollow feeling in my chest, like someone had reached inside and untethered the cords that had kept me connected to them all these years. I felt like a guest in my own family, like I'd been invited to laugh at my own humiliation and told it was a privilege to be included. I stopped responding. I stopped hoping. But I kept watching. Rachel's social media was still public. The photos from Christmas were still up, the dinner table glowing under warm lights, everyone smiling, glasses raised. I wasn't in a single one of them. Not that I expected to be. But then I saw it. A video clip, shaky and only a few seconds long, of Rachel reading from something and the whole table cracking up. You couldn't hear the words clearly, but you could hear my name. And the caption? "When your brother writes a rom-com in his diary and you find it." It had over 1,000 views. People had commented things like, "OMG savage," and "Your poor brother LOL," and "This is next-level sibling energy." One person said, "He'll laugh about it eventually," and Rachel had replied, "He's still pouting in his room somewhere." Classic Trev. My hands were shaking. I remember that clearly. Not with rage, but with something deeper, something more brittle. It was the feeling of being laughed at and erased at the same time. Like my pain had been converted into content, and the people I trusted had turned my lowest thoughts into punchlines for internet clout. I reported the video. It didn't get taken down. That night, I called my friend Jordan, one of the few people who actually knew how much writing meant to me. We talked for hours. He didn't offer any platitudes. He just listened, and then said, "You know this isn't about the journal, right? It's about who they've always been." He was right. Once I started looking, I realized it had been building for years. Rachel had always found a way to make me the joke. She was the kind of person who'd borrow my clothes and then post a selfie calling them nerd chic. The kind who once found an old photo of me in braces and made it her phone background for laughs. At family events, she'd bring up awkward stories from middle school like they were treasured memories. "Remember when Trevor cried because his turtle died and made us do a funeral in the backyard?" Cue the laughter. Every single time. And everyone else just let her. Even when it wasn't funny anymore. Even when it was cruel. But this time was different. This time, she didn't just embarrass me. She violated something sacred. She invaded the one space I had left, the one thing I hadn't shared with anyone. Not because I was ashamed, but because it was mine. And she took it, twisted it, and passed it around like a party favor. And they let her. I started therapy 2 weeks after Christmas. I didn't tell anyone in the family. I'd been thinking about it for a while, but the journal incident was the final push. The therapist, a calm woman named Diane with soft gray curls and a voice like smooth stone, listened to my story and said, "That wasn't a joke. That was emotional abuse masked as humor." Hearing it put like that felt like the first honest sentence I'd heard in months. The sessions became a lifeline. I talked about more than just Rachel. I talked about how small I'd felt growing up, how invisible I'd been, how often I'd laughed along with jokes about me just so I wouldn't feel left out. Diane helped me unpack it, piece by piece, until I started to see a pattern I'd never noticed before. The way my parents had always excused Rachel's behavior because she was spirited or just teasing. The way Liam had coasted through it all by staying neutral, which somehow always aligned with whoever was loudest. The way I'd taught myself to shrink, to make room for everyone else's personalities, to avoid being the target by never standing out. But something shifted after that night. I stopped shrinking. I began to set boundaries, even if they were quiet ones. I unfollowed all of them on social media. I didn't announce it. I just did it. I turned off message previews on my phone. I started writing again, not in a journal, but in documents with passwords. I started working out. I started cooking for myself instead of ordering in. None of it was drastic, but it felt like reclaiming space. Like breathing again. The family noticed. Of course they did. Rachel left another voicemail around Valentine's Day. This one was more clipped, a little annoyed. "Okay, Trevor, this is getting ridiculous. Are you seriously not talking to anyone over a journal? Grow up. You're being dramatic." I said I was sorry. What else do you want? She hadn't actually said she was sorry. Not once, not directly. But apparently, her pretending to be confused counted. Then came Mom. She left a message saying the whole family was worried about me and that my absence from Liam's birthday dinner had hurt his feelings. When I didn't respond, she sent a long email. It was polite on the surface, but between the lines, it was guilt-trippy as hell. She said I was choosing to hold on to bitterness, and that we all make mistakes, but family forgives. Except no one had asked me for forgiveness. No one had acknowledged what they did was wrong. Then, a few weeks later, something happened that flipped the entire situation on its head. I got a wedding invitation. Rachel was engaged. To a guy named Matt, someone she'd only been dating for 6 months. The kind of fast, flashy engagement that gets plastered all over Instagram with captions like, "When you know," and hashtags about finding your forever. The invitation was a thick, expensive card wrapped in gold-trimmed vellum, like it had come straight from a royal scroll. It had calligraphy, a custom wax seal, a note inside that said, "Hope to see you there, little bro. XO, Rachel and Matt." I almost laughed. After everything, she still expected me to show up, to clap and cheer and pose for photos like nothing had happened. Like I wasn't the joke she'd used to entertain a room full of relatives. Like I hadn't spent the last 3 months piecing myself back together after she'd torn through me like I was nothing more than a page in a script she didn't like. But then I noticed something else. The RSVP card had a line that said special instructions or dietary restrictions, and a blank space beneath it. I stared at it for a long time, pen in hand, and something clicked. It wasn't just about the wedding. It was about the pattern, the cycle, the way Rachel, and by extension, the whole family, had always controlled the narrative. The way I was always expected to forgive, to laugh along, to be the peacekeeper. But I wasn't a punchline anymore. I didn't send the RSVP back. Instead, I started making a plan. And what Rachel didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this time, I wasn't just going to disappear quietly. This time, they were going to feel what it's like to be exposed, to have the mirror turned, to be reminded that some jokes have consequences. And I already knew exactly where to start. I didn't feel powerful right away. That came later. At first, there was just a quiet, almost empty ache, like the aftermath of a storm where everything's still standing, but the air feels thinner. The silence after the wedding invitation hit me harder than I expected. I'd made up my mind not to go, but the truth was, I still stared at the envelope for days, left it sitting on my kitchen table like some ancient artifact. I even caught myself wondering what would happen if I showed up. If I dressed sharp, stayed silent, made Rachel squirm just by existing. But then I pictured her giving that smug speech about how important family is and how glad she was to see everyone come together, while I sat there invisible in the back row, and I knew I couldn't do it. I was done pretending, so I let the RSVP deadline pass. Quietly. No reply. No message. Nothing. And that silence was its own kind of declaration. But around the same time, life outside the family was starting to fray too. The truth is, the journal incident hadn't just rattled me emotionally. It had made everything feel unstable. I was behind on projects at work. I kept missing meetings, zoning out during calls. My boss, Jeremy, pulled me aside one day and asked if everything was okay. I lied, of course. Said I was just feeling burned out. Said I'd get back on track. He nodded, but I could tell he didn't really believe me. Then came the warning email. Missed deadline. Client unhappy. This isn't like you, Trevor. Please let me know how we can support you in getting back on track. It was kind, but it stung. Because for the first time in my adult life, I didn't recognize myself either. I felt like I was treading water in clothes that didn't fit anymore. Rock bottom didn't look like some dramatic crash. It looked like waking up one morning, opening my laptop, and staring at the blinking cursor on a blank document for 2 hours before quietly closing it again and going back to bed. That was the moment I realized I was slipping and no one was coming to catch me. Not my family. Not even me. But maybe that's where the shift really started. Because once I admitted to myself that I was at the bottom, I also realized I didn't want to stay there. So I started small. Tiny, invisible victories. I made my bed every morning, no matter how pointless it felt. I deleted Rachel's number from my phone. Not blocked, not archived. Deleted, like it never belonged there. I went back to therapy, even when I didn't feel like talking. Some days I just sat in silence across from Diane and listened to the hum of the white noise machine in her office. And slowly, piece by piece, I started building something again. The first real turning point came from a stranger, oddly enough. I'd been frequenting this local coffee shop a few blocks from my apartment. Quiet place. Soft jazz. Baristas who didn't try to make conversation beyond room for cream. It was perfect. I'd started bringing my laptop there again, not to work, just to sit with it, to remind myself what it felt like to want to create. One day, I noticed a woman sitting across from me, probably in her mid-30s, frowning at her screen like it had personally betrayed her. After a few minutes, she sighed, rubbed her temples, and muttered just loud enough for me to hear, "I swear this grant application is going to kill me." I smiled without meaning to. I said that about a grocery list yesterday. She laughed, just a short, surprised laugh. Then she said, "You a writer too?" I hesitated. It had been months since I'd thought of myself that way. But I nodded. Her name was Becca. She worked for a small nonprofit and wrote grant proposals and funding letters and marketing blurbs. We talked for a few minutes. Nothing deep, just enough to remember what real conversation felt like. She wasn't prying. She wasn't performative. She was just kind. We ended up exchanging emails. I offered to look at her draft. She offered to buy the next round of coffee. It was nothing romantic, just a brief and genuine connection between two tired creatives trying to stay afloat. That night, I reread some of my old writing. Not the journal, the real stuff. Short stories, blog drafts, unfinished essays. I found a piece I'd started a year earlier, something raw and confessional about emotional invisibility and growing up in the shadow of louder siblings. I'd abandoned it halfway through because it felt too personal, too vulnerable. But now it felt like the one thing I actually wanted to say. So I finished it. It took a week, a dozen revisions, and more coffee than any human should legally consume. But when I was done, I submitted it anonymously to a small digital magazine I'd always admired but never had the courage to pitch. I didn't tell anyone, not even Becca. I just hit submit and went on with my week, trying not to obsess over it. A month later, they published it. I woke up to an email with the subject line, "We loved your piece and would be honored to feature it in our March issue." I read it 3 times before it sank in. And then the comments started rolling in. People shared it, commented things like, "This hit too close to home," and "I thought I was the only one who grew up like this." One person wrote, "It felt like you crawled into my head and said the things I've been too scared to admit out loud." That one made me cry, not because it was sad, but because it was the first time in months, maybe years, that I felt seen. Not mocked, not laughed at. Seen. The success was small, quiet. No one in my family even knew about it. But that made it better, somehow. It was mine. No one could twist it into a joke or turn it into a viral video. It was a version of me I didn't have to shrink or apologize for. And once I tasted that feeling, I couldn't stop. I started writing every day again. Essays, reflections, even fiction. I opened a Substack and posted weekly. Within 2 months, I had a few hundred subscribers. Then 1,000. People began commenting, emailing me, asking questions, sharing their own stories. I'd struck a nerve I didn't even know I was aiming for. It wasn't therapy, but it was something close. At work, things started stabilizing too. I got back on top of my projects. Landed a new client. My boss noticed. He didn't say much, just sent a one-line message during a team meeting. Glad to have the old Trevor back. I wasn't the old Trevor, though. The old me would have gone to that wedding out of obligation. Laughed at the jokes. Pretended it didn't hurt. The old me would have played nice, kept the peace, and swallowed the discomfort for the sake of family unity. But the new me? He was still quiet, still kind, but no longer soft in the way that lets people carve their names into your back and call it a compliment. The new me had boundaries. Not walls, but firm lines. He no longer apologized for needing respect. He didn't explain why some jokes weren't funny. He didn't ask for permission to be treated like a person. A few weeks before the wedding, Becca texted me a screenshot. Someone had posted a link to my essay in a Facebook group for adult children of narcissistic families. It had nearly 1,000 likes and shares. "This guy gets it," one of the comments said. "Wish I had the guts to walk away like he did." And that's when it hit me. I hadn't just walked away. I'd walked toward something. Toward healing. Toward self-respect. Toward the version of myself I'd always kept hidden in the pages of that journal. The one who dared to feel deeply, to speak honestly, to exist without asking for permission. And as the wedding day crept closer, I didn't feel guilt. I felt ready. Not for revenge. Not yet. But for the clarity that comes when you stop waiting for someone else to hand you your dignity. Because I'd already reclaimed it. And I was just getting started. By the time spring rolled around and wedding season was in full swing, I was no longer checking my phone for updates from Rachel or the rest of my family. The silence wasn't bitter anymore. It was intentional, peaceful. I wasn't waiting for an apology that would never come, and I wasn't interested in giving them the satisfaction of knowing I was hurting. Because the truth was, I wasn't anymore. Not in the way I had been. But healing doesn't mean forgetting. And forgiveness? That has to be earned. Rachel's wedding was scheduled for mid-June, a flashy countryside venue with white columns, an open bar, and the kind of rustic charm she probably saw on Pinterest and decided was her entire personality now. I only knew this because Liam texted me a photo from one of the venue visits. He still messaged sometimes, trying to stay neutral, to play Switzerland, but I kept my responses short. Cordial, but distant. He was the one person I hadn't fully cut out, though I no longer trusted him the way I used to. A week after that photo, he asked, "You really not coming to the wedding?" I stared at the message for a while. Then I typed back, "No." He replied a minute later, "That sucks, man. I was hoping to see you. You doing okay?" I didn't answer. But I wasn't just okay. I was preparing. Because while they were planning a picture-perfect wedding with gold foil invitations and signature cocktails, I was crafting something else entirely. Not something loud or dramatic. Not the kind of revenge that would make me look petty or vindictive. No, this had to be clean, precise, poetic, and personal. My first step was gathering information, not from Rachel directly, but through the breadcrumbs she and the rest of the family had been leaving online for months. My mom posted updates constantly. The cake tasting, the dress fittings, the seating charts. Every post was tagged, every vendor praised in the captions, every stylist and florist mentioned by name. I made a folder. I saved screenshots, dates, locations, schedules. I knew exactly where the wedding would be, when the bridal party would arrive, and even what songs were going to be played during the ceremony. But I wasn't interested in ruining the wedding day. That would have been too easy, too messy. Besides, causing a scene at someone's wedding is a one-night revenge at best, and I wasn't after one night. I wanted something that would linger. So I turned back to the thing they all underestimated about me, my writing. The essay I'd published anonymously had gained traction, enough that a few editors had reached out asking if I had more pieces to share. One of them, a woman named Erin who ran a fairly large personal essay and memoir site, offered me a guest column for the summer. She said my voice had a quiet power, and that my story had touched a nerve with a surprising number of readers. I hadn't planned on writing anything directly about my family again, but when I read her email, the idea clicked. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about all the people who had journals read aloud. All the people who were mocked for being soft, for being quiet, for being the target of jokes told by people who swore they meant well. So I started writing. Not a takedown piece, not a hit job on Rachel, but a carefully worded, brutally honest essay titled, "The Day My Sister Read My Private Journal at Christmas." It wasn't angry. It was factual. It was thoughtful. It told the story as it happened, my perspective, my pain, and most importantly, the aftermath, the betrayal, the denial, the way the family twisted it into my failure to take a joke. I wrote about growing up with someone who always needed to be the center of attention and how everyone else learned to orbit her just to keep the peace. I wrote about the impact of public humiliation, especially when it's dismissed as harmless. I wrote about the difference between teasing and cruelty, about boundaries, about silence, and about walking away, not out of spite, but out of necessity. I didn't use names, no locations, no specifics that could directly trace it back to them. But I included enough emotional truth that anyone who did know the context, anyone who'd been at that table on Christmas, would instantly recognize themselves in the story. I sent it to Aaron on a Tuesday. It went live the following Monday, and within 48 hours, it exploded. People shared it like wildfire. Therapists reposted it. Reddit threads picked it up. One even titled it, "Finally, someone said what we've all felt at family dinners." I had strangers messaging me through my Substack, thanking me for articulating things they hadn't even realized they were holding inside. People cried. People raged. Some even asked for advice on how to go no contact with their own toxic siblings. The best part? Rachel still had no idea. Because again, I hadn't used her name. I hadn't tagged her. I hadn't pointed fingers. I'd done something she never could. I told a story without needing to make it about me. But it wasn't just cathartic. It was strategic. Because a few weeks later, something strange started happening. A cousin I hadn't heard from in years messaged me out of the blue. "Hey, I just read your piece, and wow, was that about what happened at Christmas? I was there. I didn't realize it hit you that hard. I'm sorry." Then another cousin. Then an old family friend. Then a colleague of my mom's who followed my writing blog. The cracks were forming, and Rachel didn't even know it yet. But the final piece, the move that would tie it all together, came by accident. Liam messaged again, this time with a photo. It was a picture of the wedding seating chart. My name was still on it. "Guess they're hoping you show," he wrote. I stared at it, and then I zoomed in. That's when I saw it, table 9, right between Aunt Marie and Cousin Jenna. And suddenly, I knew exactly what to do. I replied, "Hey, do me a favor? Can you get a clearer photo of the whole chart?" He sent it without hesitation. Every name, every table. Who was sitting where. It wasn't just helpful, it was a gift. Because what I was planning next wasn't dramatic. It wasn't destructive. It was surgical. I opened a new document and started drafting letters. Polite ones. Formal. Tailored to a very specific group of people. The vendors. The caterer. The venue. The officiant. The DJ. The florist. I wasn't trying to sabotage their contracts or cancel anything. That wasn't the point. I just had questions. Friendly, curious questions. I posed as someone organizing a future wedding and said I'd recently attended an event where I'd seen their work. I mentioned the upcoming venue, the date. I asked about rates, service details, packages. I wanted to understand the experience they offered, the kind of clients they worked with, and if they were open to featuring past weddings in their promotional materials. Most of them replied. And just like that, I had everything I needed. A full list of services, the names of stylists, the price of Rachel's wedding down to the freaking chair rental. But more importantly, I had stories. Stories from vendors who gossiped too much. One DJ casually mentioned that the bride had insisted on controlling the playlist down to the second and had thrown a tantrum when he asked if the best man could give a speech longer than 3 minutes. The florist said Rachel demanded more peonies or I'll post a bad Yelp review. The photographer joked in passing that he had a whole folder of Bridezilla quotes from her and that this wedding was going in his do not recommend book. I recorded the calls. I saved the emails. And I wasn't going to use them, not directly. But I had them, just in case. Because now, Rachel wasn't just vulnerable in my memory. She was vulnerable in hers. The mask she wore for the world, the curated perfection, the social media smiles, the I'm the fun sibling persona, was wearing thin. And I was the only one who knew where the cracks were. Still, I didn't send anything. I didn't publish a follow-up piece. I didn't forward the vendor gossip to anyone. Instead, I waited. And a few days before the wedding, I finally broke my silence. I texted Rachel. It was the first message she'd gotten from me since Christmas. It said, "Hey, just wanted to say I won't be coming to the wedding. I'll be watching from afar. And for what it's worth, I hope you've learned that some stories aren't yours to tell." She didn't respond, but I know she read it. Because that night, she deleted the Christmas video from her Instagram. Not because she felt guilty, but because she was starting to realize she wasn't in control of the narrative anymore. And for someone like Rachel, that's the beginning of the end. The day of Rachel's wedding arrived with a kind of eerie calm. It was sunny, almost offensively perfect, blue skies, birds chirping, a breeze gentle enough to make the trees sway like they'd been hired for ambience. But I didn't feel bitter. I wasn't stewing. I wasn't even angry. I felt still, because everything was in motion. The final move had been set into place 3 days earlier. See, while Rachel was busy organizing wedding hashtags and micromanaging centerpieces, she still hadn't realized what I'd done. She hadn't read the essay. She hadn't seen the threads. And if she had, she didn't recognize herself in it. That was the beauty of it. I hadn't written it for her. I'd written it for everyone but her. But the people around her? That was different. The night before the wedding, I posted a follow-up piece on my Substack. Subtle, titled, "When the Joke Isn't Funny Anymore." It wasn't a retelling, it was a reflection, a rumination on accountability, on silence, on the myth that forgiveness should be unconditional, especially when no one's asked for it. I didn't say wedding. I didn't say sister. But I wrote about what it feels like to be expected to show up for someone who never showed up for you. About how walking away isn't always petty. Sometimes it's the healthiest choice a person can make. It went live at 7 a.m. By noon, it was trending. That was the first crack. The second came at 2 p.m. when the photographer, yes, that photographer, sent me a message. "Hey man, saw your piece. Just realized who you were. Wish I'd known before. I never would have taken the job." That family was insane. Also, you weren't kidding about the journal thing? That's horrifying. I didn't reply. I didn't have to. But I screenshotted the message and archived it. Just for me. Now here's where things get interesting. At exactly 3:17 p.m., during the cocktail hour, I later found out, Rachel's wedding planner received a series of phone calls. Not from me. From vendors. Apparently, someone had forwarded my 2 essays to the venue staff. Not anonymously. Multiple people. Readers who had figured out exactly who I was writing about based on the details. Turns out, a few of them were mutuals with people at the venue. One was a friend of the caterer's assistant. Another had previously worked a wedding with the florist. I hadn't orchestrated any of it. But I didn't stop it either. The vendors, now aware they were part of a public story gaining traction online, were understandably concerned. Especially because they had reputations to protect. And suddenly, the image of a well-behaved, Instagrammable bride was being overshadowed by rumors of someone who weaponized a private journal for laughs. Rachel's wedding planner, caught between crisis control and damage limitation, had to spend the hour before the ceremony calming down a DJ who now feared being included in an expose and a florist who was furious about being lied to about credit. Someone whispered something to a bridesmaid, who whispered it to another, and by the time Rachel made it to the altar, half her bridal party knew that someone had written about her online. She didn't know how much, but she knew it was enough. According to Liam, who I spoke with later, after everything fell apart, Rachel spent the first 30 minutes of her reception asking everyone, "Do you think it's about me?" And the problem is, once you have to ask that question, you already know the answer. But that wasn't the fallout. That was just the tremor. The real collapse happened over the next 2 weeks. After the wedding photos were posted, a few readers, some of whom had pieced things together, started commenting vague, ominous things under Rachel's pictures. "This you? Guess jokes aren't always harmless, huh? Wild how some people treat family. Nothing aggressive. Nothing that could get reported. Just enough to make her squirm." She started scrubbing comments. Then archiving photos. Then, finally, taking her Instagram account private. The TikTok version of the wedding video? Gone. The registry link? Deactivated. But the damage was already done. A few people from her job, she worked in event marketing, had seen the posts before she could delete them. One coworker, who followed my Substack, recognized the story immediately, and she brought it to HR. Because here's the thing. When your entire job is branding and public image, and someone finds out you once humiliated your own sibling for laughs in front of a dozen people and then bragged about it online, that reflects poorly. Especially when your brother ends up writing essays about abuse and healing that go semi-viral and get reposted by therapists and advocacy groups. She wasn't fired, but she was reassigned. Off the client-facing team. Internal only now. No more events. No more front page. Her job title didn't change, but her visibility did. And for someone like Rachel, that was worse. But the final blow, the one that broke the image for good, came from within the family. Because while I stayed quiet publicly, I did something else in private. I sent a copy of both essays to our parents. Printed. In an envelope. No return address. I didn't expect much. I figured they'd skim it. Maybe roll their eyes. Maybe call me dramatic again. But a week later, my mom sent me an email. Not a voicemail. Not a forwarded meme. Not a text with a guilt-trippy emoji. An actual email. Subject line, I read what you wrote. It was 3 paragraphs long. The first paragraph was defensive, about how we didn't know you felt so strongly, and we thought it was just sibling teasing. The second paragraph tried to justify things, how Rachel never meant real harm, and how you know how she is. But the third? That was different. The third paragraph said, I'm sorry we didn't protect you. I'm sorry we didn't listen. And I'm sorry I laughed when you looked like you wanted to disappear. You didn't deserve that. It wasn't everything. It wasn't perfect. But it was a beginning. And for the first time in months, I cried. Not because I was hurt, but because I finally felt like someone saw me. Rachel never reached out. Not directly. But she posted a cryptic Instagram story one day. Just a black screen with the words, be careful who you make the villain in your story. They might be writing the book. It disappeared 24 hours later. I took a screenshot. Because maybe one day, when I finish that book, it'll be the epigraph. Now, months later, I'm still writing. Still sharing. My Substack passed 10,000 subscribers last week. I've done podcast interviews. Even signed a deal to compile my essays into a book about emotional boundaries, silence, and walking away from toxic family dynamics. People still ask, did she ever apologize? And the answer is no. But I don't need her to anymore. Because revenge doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes, it's just living in peace while the people who once mocked you slowly realize. You were never the joke. You were the story. And they'll never get to rewrite it again. I don't need to burn bridges when I've already learned how to build better roads.